Welcome back. Still with me is the senior producer of Turning Point, Holly Flood. Holly, thank you so much for staying with us. Now, your conversation with Serita Jakes, she mentioned the tragic loss of her brother.
She did, and she was very frank and candid about how she got through it. But we also talked about what she's doing now to help other people who've been through tragic situations actually overcome and get through.
Well, here's part 2 of the conversation with Serita Jakes.
Now, we were just talking about overcoming things, and I'm reminded of your new novel, The Crossing.
Yes.
First of all, I loved the novel.
Thank
It was
you.
really good.
Thank
It was really good. I
you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you.
One thing I noticed, there seemed to be some similarities between some of the characters and some of the things that you've experienced. We won't tell the book because we want people to read it for themselves.
Absolutely.
But it starts with a very traumatic event that several people go through and the impact that it has on their individual lives.
Yes.
How much do you relate to the characters? Specifically, I would think Claudia and Harper.
Post-traumatic stress disorder is not something that I personally have experienced, especially to the degree that some of the characters have in the book. But even in counseling, I've found out that if I can trace or track someone's past to a traumatic or significant event in their lives that transformed them, then I can help walk them through the steps that God has ordered for them. So it was important to me generationally to include everyone in the crossing, because we have women that have been battered that suffer from PTSD. We've seen children who have been sexually and just physically and mentally abused suffering from PTSD, rape victims suffering from PTSD. And we sit across the desk from them week after week. They're in our choir, they're in our congregation, they're on the usher board. And so I wanted to go there and let's talk about real violence. Let's talk about real trauma. And then let's talk about what begins at the crossing, which is in the book, ends at the cross.
What you just mentioned, PTSD,
Yes.
for people who don't know what that is, because in a lot of cases in the church, we don't discuss these things. People tend to, like you said, put the mask on and they keep going. What is PTSD, and how should we be responding as the body of Christ?
Okay, PTSD is the trauma or the after effects of a tragic, traumatic event in your life. And so it's behind you. However, it's like an earthquake. You're still getting those tremors from it, and you get triggers that put you right back into the situation. In The Crossing, my character, Claudia, every time she's at a railroad crossing and the train has her blocked and the blaring of the horns puts her back into an event that happened 10 years ago when she was a high school senior. And so she's sitting at the railroad crossing, panicking, because she's seeing everything that happened on the school bus 10 years ago in her life. And so as part of my ministry, I minister to young girls. And as the director of the women's ministry, I found out that inside that woman is trapped a little girl that experienced something in her past that she had no control over. And now she's getting the tremor effects. And we wonder why sometimes she comes in church and she's exuberant and she's worshiping. But at a trigger, she becomes very solemn and disconnected. And so PTSD has the tremor effect because they've been through something that they can't get over.
There are probably people watching today who are in the position we've been talking about. They're going through something. They're facing something very traumatic right now. What would you say to those people today in terms of how they could deal with their situation?
Seek counseling. Don't be ashamed. If you had high blood pressure, you take a pill. If you were diabetic, you would do your insulin. If you have an emotional disorder, go and see about yourself. And for those that have not been affected and you know someone, encourage them to do so. And take them Talk to them about it. And don't just allow them to just disguise it and mask it. And going through divorce is traumatic. To the children, it's traumatic. And to the spouses, it's traumatic. Get help to walk you through it, because you've got to have a sound mind to be able to serve the Lord. And He wants you to have a sound mind. And we always talk about prosperity. He wants us to prosper, yes, but be in good health, even as our soul prospers. And our mind needs to be renewed. And God is a forgiving God, yes. Sometimes we can't forget. He's forgiven us. And we're still trapped in what we did and who we did it with. And God has gone on with His blood, so effective. It cleanses us from all unrighteousness. However, we keep bringing it up. We keep bringing it up. Let it go. Let it go.
Holly, she talks about letting it go. Now, is there any letting go that you've had to do in your own experience?
There has been, probably quite a bit, but one of the things that stands out the most for me was the divorce of my parents. And that's one of the things that First Lady Jakes mentioned, that can actually lead to PTSD. I don't know if I had PTSD, but I do know that there were a lot of ways that affected me. And I still remember the day today that my parents actually loaded up the car, and my mom and I went to one house and my dad went to another house. I remember the effects that it had on my relationship with my father, but God has really worked it out and turned it around for good. But that was